And when the forest called, he answered. But before that moment he was just a silent shadow in the snow, lost, nameless, mistaken for something he was not. What they thought was a rescue became a revelation. Have you ever felt an invisible thread pulling you somewhere you couldn't explain, like a place you've never been, but somehow? Already know, comment yes or no below. Have you ever felt that call? Winter had settled deep into Aspen Valley, blanketing the rugged Colorado landscape with thick drifts of snow that sparkled beneath a pale, ghostly moon. The small town nestled between towering, pine-covered mountains seemed almost frozen in time under the weight of the season. A biting wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling window panes and tugging at the edges of shuttered cabins. At the far end of Main Street stood the Willow Ridge Veterinary Clinic, its warm yellow lights the only beacon against the surrounding darkness. Inside, Dr. Ethan Blake sat hunched over his cluttered desk, the soft hiss of the radiator the only sound cutting through the stillness. Dr. Blake was a man carved from quiet resilience, his features rugged yet softened by years of compassion. At 35, he wore his brown hair slightly long and unkempt, often brushing it back with ink-stained fingers. His storm-gray eyes held a depth of sorrow few understood, the kind of grief born from a loss too profound to name. Tall and broad-shouldered Ethan carried himself with a careful grace, his movements always deliberate, as though each action bore the weight of unspoken memories. His late wife, Emily, had been the heart of his world. A loss that left a permanent ache beneath his composed exterior. The ancient rotary phone on his desk shrilled through the quiet, making him jolt upright. He reached for it with a practiced calm that belied the sudden thrum of his heart. Willow Ridge Veterinary Dr. Blake speaking. He answered, his voice low and even. "Doc, it's Marcus Reed," came the rough, gravelly voice on the other end, thick with worry. Marcus was a retired hunter well into his 70s, his hands as gnarled as the pine trees he spent his life wandering among. His lined face bore the harshness of a life lived against the elements, and though his eyes remained sharp, his body had long since surrendered to age. "Found something out on the North Trail. Thought it was a pup at first, tiny thing near frozen stiff under a fallen log. But there's something off about it. Ain't never seen a pup like this before." Ethan straightened his mind, already racing through possibilities. "How's its condition?" "Not good, Doc. Barely breathing. Skin's thin as paper, no fur to speak of. Eyes, guys, biggest I ever seen on a critter that size. I don't reckon it'll make it through the night without help. Bring it in immediately. I'll be here." Ethan hung up and moved quickly, gathering blankets, the pediatric stethoscope, and a warming pad. His breath misted in the air, despite the radiator's best efforts against the winter chill. Just as he was preparing the small emergency station, the door swung open with a gust of icy air. Samantha Collins stepped inside her boots, crunching softly against the salt-strewn floor. Samantha was a striking figure of quiet strength, standing at 5'8". With a lean, athletic build, honed from years of hiking the unforgiving mountain trails. Her chestnut-brown hair was pulled back into a practical braid, and her wide hazel eyes held a warmth that could melt the hardest of hearts. At 28, she was known around town for her tireless volunteer work at the Silver Creek Wildlife Rescue Center. Orphaned at a young age and raised by her grandfather, she carried an unspoken understanding of abandonment that shaped her unwavering empathy for lost and injured creatures. Evening Doc, she greeted setting down a crate filled with veterinary supplies near the front counter. Her voice was gentle, melodic, even against the storm raging outside. "Special delivery for the Wildlife Center. Got the new batch of immune boosters you requested." Before Ethan could respond, the door burst open again. Marcus Reed stumbled in snow, clinging to his battered canvas coat and worn leather boots. His breath came in ragged clouds as he cradled a small bundle wrapped tightly in his red flannel hunting jacket. "Right here, Doc," he wheezed, his weathered face creased with worry. "Found him up by Pine Hollow. Poor thing's colder than a stone. Ethan motioned them toward the exam room, his steps quick and sure despite the tension tightening his chest. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, Marcus carefully unwrapped the bundle, revealing a creature so small and fragile that it seemed almost unreal. Its body trembled weakly, paper-thin skin revealing a network of delicate blue veins. Oversized eyes remained tightly shut, and its spindly legs ended in paws too fine-boned for any domestic puppy Ethan had ever seen. Samantha stepped closer, her breath catching at the sight. That's not a puppy, is it?" she whispered, her fingers curling against the fabric of her coat. Ethan forced his expression to remain calm. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said quietly, though his mind was already spinning through every species he knew. He ran his hands gently over the creature's tiny frame, feeling the shallow flutter of its heartbeat. Its muzzle was too long, its ears strangely pointed, even though still folded flat against its head. Marcus stood off to the side, his gnarled hands twisting the brim of his weathered hat. "I've been hunting these woods for over 50 years, Doc. Never seen nothing like this." Samantha retrieved the warming pad and set it carefully beneath the fragile creature. She leaned over her fingers, brushing gently across the trembling body. And in that moment, the tiny creature's paw reached out weak and shaking, and curled instinctively around her finger. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Even through his years of hardened professionalism, the silent plea in that small, desperate grip struck something deep within him. "We'll do everything we can," he promised, though it felt more like a prayer than a statement. The clock ticked relentlessly as they worked through the night. Fluids were administered, the warming pad carefully adjusted, and tiny sips of a specialized nutrient formula offered. Outside, the blizzard howled through Aspen Valley. But inside the clinic, a fragile life hung suspended between survival and surrender. By dawn, the creature's breathing had stabilized slightly. Samantha sat nearby, her head resting against the wall, eyes red from exhaustion, but still watching over the small, mysterious being with quiet vigilance. Ethan sat beside the exam table, staring at the fragile bundle swaddled in blankets, his fingers lightly brushing its fine-boned head. For the first time in months, he felt something stir within his long, numbed heart, a flicker of hope, faint but persistent, like the first ember of a fire struggling against the cold. The days that followed brought a fragile peace to Willow Ridge Veterinary Clinic. Outside, the snowstorm had relented, leaving the valley coated in thick, crystalline blankets that gleamed beneath the bright winter sun. The icicles hanging from the eaves glittered like fragile daggers, and the air, though calmer, remained biting cold. Inside the clinic, warmth and a tentative sense of hope bloomed in the soft hum of medical equipment and the gentle rustle of blankets as the small creature whom Samantha had affectionately named Finn began to show signs of recovery. Finn's tiny body had filled out slightly, his trembling subsiding with each passing day. Yet even as his strength grew, it became more evident to Ethan that this was no ordinary puppy. His behavior was instinctive, raw, something primal stirred beneath that delicate exterior. His eyes, now open and gleaming a haunting amber, flicked alertly at every sound-tracking movements with an intensity uncommon for a creature so young. His nose lifted often toward the window, as if the call of the wild beyond the glass whispered secrets only he could hear. Samantha had become a near-constant presence at the clinic. Each morning she arrived early, brushing snow from her thick parka, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Though her outward demeanor remained as warm and gentle as ever, Ethan noticed a strange melancholy in her eyes as she spent hours sitting by Finn's enclosure, humming soft, wordless lullabies and watching the small creature's every move. One afternoon, as the winter light filtered softly through the frosted windows, Samantha sat on the floor near Finn's enclosure, absently tracing patterns in the frost on the glass. Ethan was seated nearby, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. "You're sure he's a dog?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock. Ethan sighed, his eyes not leaving Finn's slender form as the little creature paced the length of his enclosure, his paws whispering against the fleece blankets. "I've been a vet for over a decade, Sam. But I've never seen a pup like this." He shook his head slowly. "The proportions are all wrong. Ying's too long. Ears, too pointed eyes, too knowing." Samantha pulled her knees to her chest and rested her chin atop them. Her hazel eyes grew distant, as if caught in a memory long buried. "When I was 7, she began softly. I got lost in the Bitterroot Forest." Her fingers tightened around her knees. "My grandfather had taken me camping, and I wandered off chasing a butterfly. Hours passed before I realized I couldn't find my way back. It started snowing. I remember sitting beneath a huge pine, crying, thinking I'd freeze before anyone found me." She swallowed, her eyes glistening. "And then, I wasn't alone. A coyote appeared. Not like the ones you read about or hear howling in the distance. This one was close, so close, I could see the frost clinging to its fur. It didn't attack or run. It just stood there watching me. When I stood up, it walked a few steps ahead and turned back as if telling me to follow. And I did. That coyote led me straight back to my grandfather's camp." Ethan's hand tightened involuntarily around the mug. Memories of his wife Emily came unbidden, her soft laughter echoing through the halls of their old cabin, her dream of opening a wildlife sanctuary, her untimely death on the icy roads just 2 winters ago. He had buried her dream, along with her locking away that chapter of his life, in the silent grief of his heart. Samantha wiped her eyes and smiled faintly. "I know it sounds crazy, but maybe some wild creatures are meant to cross our paths. Maybe they show up when we need them most." Before Ethan could reply, the doorbell chimed softly, announcing a visitor. The cold swept in as the door creaked open, and a tall man stepped inside, brushing snow from his heavy coat. He was in his early 50s, lean and wiry, with a weathered face tanned by years of sun and wind. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room with the caution of someone who'd spent his life on the edge of civilization. Dr. Blake. His voice was rough but calm. "Name's Jonah Whitaker. I'm with the Colorado Wildlife Conservation Bureau." Ethan stood surprised. "I didn't know we had a field agent posted this close to Aspen Valley." Jonah shrugged, his movements deliberate. "Usually I'm further west, but word travels fast in small towns. Heard you found something unusual." His gaze shifted to the enclosure where Finn now sat motionless, ears, perked high eyes locked on the newcomer with unnerving focus. Jonah stepped closer, kneeling carefully to Finn's level. His sharp eyes studied every feature of the small creature, his narrow snout, the alert triangular ears, the growing thickness of his tawny gray fur. "Where did you say you found him?" Jonah asked, his tone low. Ethan exchanged a glance with Samantha before recounting Marcus Reed's discovery. Jonah listened intently, then sat back on his heels. "You might want to send a DNA sample out to the state lab," he said. "But between you and me, I've seen enough of the wild to know that's no dog." Samantha exhaled shakily, her earlier words echoing through the room. As the day faded into a pink and purple twilight, Jonah offered to help arrange testing through official channels, promising discretion. Before he left, he paused at the door, looking back at Finn. "Be careful," he said quietly. "If he is what I think he is, he doesn't belong in a cage for long." That night, as the first stars pricked through the inky sky, Ethan stood at the window, his thoughts tangled in memories and what-ifs. Behind him, Finn's soft, high-pitched cries echoed faintly through the clinic, not unlike the lonely call of a wild spirit longing for the freedom of the open woods. A week had passed since Jonah Whitaker's quiet but firm warning. Aspen Valley remained shrouded in deep winter, but the storm's rage had softened into pale sunlight and a brittle stillness. The snow no longer came in heavy flurries, but in a soft, almost hesitant drizzle, each flake settling on the world like a secret being kept. Inside Willow Ridge Veterinary Clinic, the atmosphere had shifted. No longer a space of routine checkups and surgeries, it had become a quiet sanctuary where something untamed stirred behind glass walls. Finn had grown visibly. His limbs, once frail and uncoordinated, now moved with a strange feline grace. His coat, previously patchy and nearly translucent, had begun to thicken into a silvery gray that shimmered faintly under the soft lights. Yet what most unnerved Ethan was not his appearance, but the way the creature behaved skittish around loud noises, reactive to scents carried on the wind, and drawn inexplicably to the tall windows that looked out onto the forest edge. Samantha was the first to suggest it. "He needs to feel the world outside," she said one morning as she gently replaced Finn's water dish. Her voice held a mixture of care and conviction. "He's not meant to stay behind glass forever." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stood across the room, flipping through Finn's growing file of observations, every page filled with sketches, notes, measurements. A scientist's way of trying to make sense of something that refused categorization. They agreed to begin cautiously short-supervised sessions in the clinic's enclosed backyard, an area usually used for recovering pets. It was surrounded by a tall wooden fence and offered patches of snow tufts of hardy winter grass and scattered pine cones fallen from nearby trees. That afternoon, wrapped in scarves and thick jackets, Ethan and Samantha opened the door to the enclosure. Finn stepped out hesitantly, his paws sinking slightly into the crusted snow. He lifted his snout and inhaled sharply. Something shifted in his posture, an alertness, a quiet reverence. And then, with unexpected confidence, he moved forward. Ethan watched, heart caught somewhere between awe and dread, as Finn sniffed the air with precision, circled the trees, and instinctively scraped the ground near a pine stump. A flash of movement sent him bounding toward the fence, muscles rippling under his growing coat. Not playful, not erratic. Purposeful. Focused. Wild. Samantha's voice broke the silence. "He knows the world out here better than we do." They didn't see it then, but someone had been watching. From behind a black SUV parked across the street, a man in a tailored wool coat stood half-shielded by a telephone pole. He was in his early 40s, clean-shaven, with a sharp, angular face and eyes like cold steel. His name was Victor Langston, a field investigator for the Division of Invasive Wildlife Management. Dressed more like a businessman than a conservationist, Victor was methodical, unsympathetic, and known among state agencies for his black-and-white view on wild species within city limits. If it was wild and undocumented, it was a threat. He scribbled notes on a slim notepad and took a final photo before slipping back into his car, his breath steaming in the air. He'd received an anonymous tip earlier that week, something about a mysterious animal being kept illegally in a vet clinic. The moment he'd seen Finn, he knew this wasn't about a lost puppy anymore. Back at the clinic, Ethan and Samantha were inside again, warming up over mugs of herbal tea. They watched Finn through the viewing glass where he now lay, stretched in a sunlit corner of the room, eyes half-lidded, but ears alert. "I was thinking," Samantha said gently, "maybe we could try scent testing. Set up a line of natural animal scents, rabbit, fox, raccoon, and see what he gravitates toward." Ethan nodded. "Could help narrow behavior tendencies. We should also try vocal response, howls, chirps, even prey calls." He hesitated. "But we'll need better soundproofing. Don't want to alarm the neighbors." The conversation was interrupted by the sharp ping of an email notification on Ethan's computer. He moved to the screen and clicked it open. It was from the Colorado State Lab. DNA analysis partial results. As the file opened, a tension pulled tight across his shoulders. Samantha moved behind him, reading over his shoulder. The document was sparse but clear. Subject shows non-domesticated Canidae markers. Further sequencing pending. Samantha exhaled slowly. "That means..." It's not a dog," Ethan finished. They stared at the screen in silence. It wasn't final, but it was enough. Enough to know that the instincts they'd been quietly pushing aside had a name: Coyote. That night, long after Samantha had gone home and the clinic had fallen silent, Ethan remained. The lights were dimmed, and the only sound came from the low hum of the incubator heater. Finn slept curled into a soft fleece blanket, his narrow chest rising and falling in quiet rhythm. Ethan stood nearby, phone in hand, thumb hovering over Jonah Whitaker's contact. He didn't make the call. Not yet. Instead, he turned and walked toward the back of the clinic to a locked drawer in his office. From it, he retrieved a weathered notebook, Emily's old wildlife journal. The pages were filled with sketches of wolves, foxes, coyotes. Notes in her graceful handwriting danced across the margins. Some creatures are never meant to be caged, but sometimes they visit us not to stay, but to change us. He closed the notebook slowly and returned to Finn's side. The little creature stirred in his sleep, one paw twitching. Ethan reached out not to touch, but just to be close, breathing in the quiet wildness that now lived inside his clinic. The morning sun painted Aspen Valley in golden hues, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. At the Willow Ridge Veterinary Clinic, everything looked ordinary from the outside frosted windows, the gentle hum of heaters, a "closed for cleaning" sign hung on the front door. But inside, tension curled beneath the warmth, like smoke under floorboards. Ethan Blake stood in the exam room beside Finn's enclosure, arms crossed, eyes distant. The young creature lay stretched out in a patch of sunlight, his fur now fully developed into a sleek coat of silver and ash, his ears flicking subtly at every distant sound. There was a confidence in Finn's posture, the kind seen in predators that no longer fear the unknown. His body was coyote through and through. The partial DNA results had only confirmed what Finn had been quietly telling them from the start. Samantha entered with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She wore a heavy wool cardigan over a thermal shirt, her braid pulled tighter than usual. Her eyes, sharp with clarity and concern, found Ethan's at once. "No sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. Didn't want to leave him alone. They sipped coffee in silence for a moment, before Samantha spoke again. "I contacted the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Leadville. They said they've handled orphaned coyotes before. They can take him, if it comes to that." If Ethan murmured, gaze never leaving Finn. "Sam, we both know it will come to that." Just then the doorbell rang. Samantha frowned. "We're closed this morning." Ethan stepped into the lobby, opened the door, and there stood Victor Langston, dressed in a black overcoat with a Department of Wildlife badge clipped to his lapel. He exuded authority and detachment in equal measure. He was a man used to being obeyed, his face unreadable, his voice smooth but clipped. "Dr. Blake, I'm Victor Langston. I'm with the Division of Invasive Wildlife Management." He held out a business card. Ethan accepted it without comment. "I assume this isn't a social call." "No," Victor said simply. "We received an anonymous tip regarding a non-domesticated animal being kept on these premises. I'd like to take a look at your facilities." Samantha emerged behind Ethan, her body going rigid. "He's not a threat," she said. "He's just a baby." Victor offered a tight, practiced smile, which makes now the perfect time to handle the situation responsibly before it becomes more complicated. With no legal grounds to refuse, Ethan led Victor through the hallway. As they approached the exam room, Finn stirred, sensing something different. When they entered, the young coyote rose and fixed his gaze directly on Victor. Victor stopped in the doorway, studying Finn through the enclosure glass. "You've done a remarkable job keeping him alive," he said. "But this," he gestured toward the animal, "this is not a pet. You understand that, don't you, Doctor?" "I do," Ethan replied evenly. "But I also know what happens to most animals like him when they fall under state custody." Victor turned slowly. "Are you implying that I don't follow proper procedures, or I'm implying that procedure doesn't always serve the animal?" Ethan said. Victor's eyes narrowed. Then you'd better decide which side of this you're on, because either way, I'm submitting a report. And once that DNA test is complete, the law becomes very clear. As Victor exited the clinic, Samantha gripped the edge of the reception desk. We have to move fast. Ethan nodded. We need full confirmation. And we need Jonah back. That night after closing, Ethan sent a secure message to Jonah Whitaker. He kept it brief: DNA confirmation likely. State official involved. Need your help. Urgent. Then he turned to Samantha and said, We're doing the scent test tomorrow. I want to see if instinct guides him where nothing else can. The next morning, with Victor's visit still weighing heavily on them, they prepared the small outdoor enclosure. Samantha laid out scent trails using cloths soaked in rabbit, fox, raccoon, and coyote urine collected from a friend at the rescue center. Each cloth was placed in a separate corner of the yard, with distance between them to prevent confusion. Finn was released slowly, his nose twitching instantly. He moved carefully, methodically, avoiding the fox and raccoon trails entirely. He paused briefly at the rabbit scent sniffed, then moved on. But when he reached the cloth bearing coyote scent, his body froze. Then gently he lowered himself onto it and rolled. Samantha gasped softly. That's a submission gesture. Recognition. It's not instinct, Ethan whispered. It's memory. They repeated the test twice more over the next hour. Each time, Finn reacted the same way. The evidence was irrefutable. Jonah arrived late that afternoon, his flannel shirt dusted with snow, eyes alert as ever. After Ethan briefed him, Jonah requested time alone with Finn. He crouched beside the enclosure, not reaching in, just observing. Finn watched him with silent, cautious eyes. I've seen enough, Jonah said after 10 minutes. He's bonded to you two, deeply. But his instincts are pulling him away. That conflict won't last forever. What do we do? Samantha asked. Jonah's gaze didn't flinch. Prepare to let him go. But do it on your terms, not the state's. They spent the evening going over transfer plans. Jonah made contact with the Leadville Wildlife Rehabilitation Center and arranged for a discreet pickup in 72 hours. Enough time to finalize paperwork, run final health checks, and emotionally prepare. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting violet shadows across the snow, Ethan sat beside Finn's enclosure. The young coyote pressed his head against the glass. Ethan laid his hand on the other side, neither of them looking away. You don't belong here, he murmured, but I'm glad you came. A pale morning mist clung low over Aspen Valley, blurring the edges of pine trees and softening the cold bite in the air. The stillness was deceiving. Beneath the surface, whispers moved through the town like wind through brittle branches. At Willow Ridge Veterinary Clinic, Ethan Blake sipped his coffee with steady hands, but his chest felt tight. 3 days, that's all the time they had before Finn would be transferred to Leadville's Rehabilitation Center. The decision had been made, and yet the heaviness of it lingered like the weight of snow on old roof beams. Samantha arrived just before opening, her face pale despite the thick scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Her eyes immediately found Ethan's. It started, she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. The gossip. Mrs. Elkins told me her son saw a weird-looking pup in our yard. Now there's talk on the community forum, wild animal at the vet clinic. Ethan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We knew it might come to this. At the same moment the clinic phone rang. Samantha answered and quickly put it on speaker. Jonah's voice came through calm and direct. Just a heads up, I intercepted some chatter from Victor Langston's office. He filed a preliminary containment request. If he gets full DNA confirmation before the transfer, they could step in sooner than expected. Ethan's voice was sharp. What does that mean? It means if you want to keep control of this situation, move up the timeline. I'll call the center, see if they can take him tomorrow." After the call, Ethan leaned against the exam room door, watching Finn pace in his enclosure. The young coyote had become more alert, more restless. He'd started letting out high-pitched yips at night, lonely, instinctive sounds that echoed long after the clinic had gone dark. He no longer played with towels or curled easily in the corners. He pressed against the glass. He wanted out. That afternoon, as Ethan prepared vaccine records for his other patients, the front door chimed. A familiar figure stepped in Mrs. Henderson Aspen Valley's unofficial town news curator. In her late 60s, she stood no taller than 5 feet, always clad in floral sweaters and thick woolen skirts. Her demeanor was usually chipper, but today her lips were pursed and her cane tapped sharply on the linoleum floor. "Dr. Blake," she said, voice slightly raised, "is it true you've got a wild animal locked in that back room?" Samantha moved quickly from the counter. "We're not discussing patient details, Mrs. Henderson." "Well," she huffed, adjusting her thick glasses, "people have a right to know what's happening in their town." "If there's danger, there's no danger," Ethan said calmly as he approached. "He's under observation and receiving care. That's all." Mrs. Henderson's eyes softened slightly. "I hope you know what you're doing, Ethan. People are talking." She left as quickly as she came, but the unease remained. That evening, Samantha and Ethan dimmed the clinic lights and retreated to the small staff room. Outside, the town's main street was quiet, save for the occasional crunch of snow under passing boots. Samantha sat on the old couch with her legs tucked beneath her. "I don't think we ever talked about her," she said gently. Ethan looked over confused. "Emily," she clarified. He froze, then slowly lowered himself into the armchair across from her. The silence stretched between them. "She always believed animals came into our lives to teach us something," he said, finally. "She wanted to build a wildlife sanctuary on the ridge near Willow Creek Falls. We never got the chance. The night she died, we'd just finalized the plans." Samantha's eyes glistened. "Then maybe Finn is the lesson she wanted you to finish learning." The next morning arrived faster than either of them expected. Jonah called early. "They're ready in Leadville. I'll be there by noon with the paperwork." Ethan spent the next few hours preparing a small crate with soft bedding and a heating pad. Samantha packed a sealed bag of Finn's food. A blanket he'd slept on, and a folded note with the scent of her hands pressed into the paper. Neither said much. There was little left to say. By 11:30, Finn had been coaxed gently into the crate. He didn't struggle. He didn't whine. He simply looked at them, first at Ethan, then at Samantha, as if he knew. Jonah arrived in a forest green pickup, modest and worn. His usual flannel was replaced by a ranger's uniform today badge, dull in the morning light. He handled the transfer with solemn efficiency. As Jonah lifted the crate into the back, a car pulled up fast to the curb. Out stepped Victor Langston, jaw-tight folder in hand. He approached, motioning to the crate. "You're moving the animal?" Ethan stepped between him and the truck. "We've coordinated the transfer with the rehabilitation center directly. I haven't received final DNA confirmation." "That doesn't give you authority." Jonah stepped forward, calm but firm. "Actually, it does. Section 14B of the State Wildlife Code allows early placement under certified handler supervision when health and safety are at stake. You're welcome to follow up at the center." Victor's lips pressed into a thin line. He said nothing more, just scribbled a note into his folder and turned back toward his vehicle. As Jonah drove away, Samantha stood beside Ethan, arms folded tightly against her chest. "It felt like we were giving him away," she whispered. "I know," Ethan replied. "But we're also giving him back to the place he belongs." That night, the clinic felt hollow. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the empty corner where Finn's enclosure had stood. On the desk lay a photo one Emily had taken years ago of a fox curled in their backyard. On the back, she'd written, "Sometimes wild hearts only visit, but their echoes stay forever." The road to Leadville wound through a wilderness draped in silence and snow. Pines lined the narrow highway like solemn sentinels, their branches heavy with white. Inside the forest green pickup, Jonah kept one hand on the wheel, the other steadying the crate secured beside him. Finn lay quietly within his golden eyes, watching the passing trees. There was no fear in them now, only awareness. Like he remembered something ancient, something bigger than the walls of any clinic could contain. Back in Aspen Valley, Ethan Blake stood on the wind-swept ridge behind his clinic, gazing down at Willow Creek Falls. A scarf hung loosely around his neck, forgotten in the bitter wind. In his hand was Emily's notebook pages fluttering like wings. Her sketches, her dreams, the maps she drew of where the sanctuary would one day stand, it was all there, alive. And for the first time since her passing, Ethan didn't feel grief when he opened it. He felt her voice in the wind. The decision had come quietly the night before he would revive her dream. Aspen Heart Sanctuary would become real. Downstairs in the clinic, Samantha was already sorting files and drafting emails. She sat cross-legged on the floor laptop, open coffee steaming nearby. Her usually neat braid was unraveling wisps falling into her eyes, but she didn't notice. She was focused scanning permits, writing proposals, contacting contacts at wildlife foundations she'd once volunteered with. When Ethan stepped into the room, she looked up. "We can make this happen," she said, before he could speak. He smiled, soft and weary. "I know. I just needed to believe it again." Meanwhile, in Leadville, Finn was being introduced to his temporary home, a modest but well-equipped wildlife rehabilitation center nestled in a wooded basin just outside town. The center director, Rosa Jimenez, was a sturdy woman in her early 40s, with strong arms, sun-worn skin, and a gentle command in her voice. Born to Mexican immigrants, Rosa had grown up in the highlands of Durango before moving to Colorado to study conservation biology. She had a deep love for wild things and a fierce respect for their autonomy. She knelt beside Finn's crate and spoke softly. "Hola, pequeño. You've been through a lot. Let's see what the world still has in store for you." Jonah, who had worked with Rosa before, briefed her on Finn's condition behavior and the emotional bond he'd formed with his human caretakers. Rosa listened without interrupting, occasionally glancing at the young coyote now curled in the straw-lined enclosure she had prepared. "We'll do things gently," she said. "Let him lead." The first 2 days were observational. Finn was kept in a transitional pen, a space with access to the forest edge, but still monitored by cameras and staff. Rosa assigned a young intern, Noah Vance, to assist with Finn's integration. Noah was 23, lanky, with tousled blonde hair, an easy grin, and a pair of square glasses that were always slightly smudged. A former anthropology major turned conservationist, he was still learning, but his curiosity was boundless, and animals responded to his calm energy. On the 3rd day, Finn encountered his first coyote vocalization since leaving the wild. A pair of older rehabilitated coyotes in the adjacent enclosure let out a haunting, echoing howl. Finn froze. Then slowly he tilted his head upward. His body trembled not from fear, but recognition. He answered. Back in Aspen Valley, word of Finn's departure began to soften the tension in town. Mrs. Henderson had shifted from outrage to storytelling, recounting the tale of the vet who almost raised a coyote like a house cat to anyone who'd listen at the general store. But Ethan had turned inward, not in sorrow, but in resolve. He and Samantha began converting the back acres of his property into Phase 1 of the sanctuary. Old fencing was taken down. Native flora was cataloged. Trail plans were drawn. An unused barn was cleared out and repurposed as a temporary wildlife intake building. One morning, while they stood surveying the area, Samantha pointed to a mossy ridge near a grove of spruce. That'd be the perfect place for an open enclosure close to water-shaded natural coverage. Ethan nodded. It's exactly where Emily wanted it. They fell into a rhythm, each task, bringing purpose, each memory now a guide rather than a ghost. A week later, Rosa called. Her voice was firm but excited. He's integrating, not fully yet, but he's choosing the wild. He's following the older coyotes, observing their routines. He's learning. Samantha was the one who answered. Is he happy? There was a pause. Then Rosa said, he's where he was meant to be. That night, Ethan lit a small fire behind the clinic. He and Samantha sat side by side on logs, salvaged from an old barn wall. Between them sat a copy of the sanctuary plans inked over Emily's original drawings. In the flames, they saw more than warmth. They saw the quiet return of something they hadn't dared to name belief. A crisp morning sun spilled over the ridgelines of Leadville, scattering gold across the dew-laced grass. Inside the rehabilitation center's larger enclosure, Finn crouched low behind a clump of tall sagebrush, watching two older coyotes nosing through the underbrush nearby. His body, once tentative and uncertain, now moved with silent confidence. His eyes no longer flicked to the fence or searched for familiar human faces. His world had changed, and slowly he had begun to belong to it. Rosa Jimenez observed from the monitoring station, her arms folded across her thick vest. She watched as Finn sniffed a set of rabbit tracks mimicked the older coyote's movements, then broke into a sudden sprint through the trees. He didn't look back once. Beside her, Noah Vance scribbled notes in a weather-worn field journal. He doesn't just follow now, he leads. Rosa nodded. We're close. He's ready. She glanced at the calendar taped beside the screen. Full release by next week, if weather holds. Meanwhile, far from the pine-lined edges of Leadville-Aspen Valley, stirred with anticipation. The townsfolk, once wary of the strange pup at the vet's office, now gathered in quiet curiosity around a new construction zone just beyond Willow Ridge Veterinary Clinic. Wooden beams stood tall in the snow-speckled clearing, forming the skeleton of a future sanctuary. A modest but purposeful structure designed to care for injured wildlife foxes, deer owls, and maybe someday another lost soul like Finn. Inside the clinic's old barn, now repurposed as Aspen Heart Sanctuary's visitor welcome area, Ethan knelt on a ladder, adjusting the final plank of reclaimed wood across the entrance. Samantha stood below, holding it steady, cheeks flushed with effort and early spring air. Looks good, she called up, brushing sawdust from her coat. Ethan stepped down, slowly wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. We'll finish in time. The opening's 4 days away, Samantha reminded him. That's if we can keep Mrs. Henderson from announcing it before we do. Ethan chuckled softly. Too late. She's already asked for a seat with a view of where the miracle pup used to live. Samantha laughed, quick and bright, and the sound lifted something in Ethan's chest. That evening, they sat by the fireplace in the clinic's front office, poring over details for the launch guest list, refreshments, signage, emergency contacts. Ethan paused midway through a sentence. Have you thought, would you stay? Help run this with me long term? Samantha looked up, surprised, but not unprepared. Her expression softened. You mean that? He nodded. I can't do it alone. I don't want to. Her voice was steady. Then yes, I'm in. At that moment, the clinic phone rang. It was Rosa. Her voice was filled with that rare blend of excitement and reverence. Tomorrow morning, we're opening the north gate. The team's ready. He's ready. Ethan's breath caught. Are you sure? As sure as you were when you let him go? Samantha listened beside him, holding his free hand. Will you let us know how it goes? Ethan asked. I'll do more than that, Rosa replied. You'll want to see this yourself. And so the next morning, under skies painted with pale lavender and coral streaks, Ethan and Samantha arrived at the Leadville Center just after sunrise. Rosa met them at the gate with her usual calm energy, handing Ethan a small field monitor. There's a blind set up near the tree line. You'll see everything from there without disturbing the moment. Together they walked in silence, guided by Noah to the edge of the wilderness. The blind was simple, a canvas-covered structure hidden among young pines, cold but quiet. Inside, Ethan set the monitor on a wooden crate and waited. Through the branches, the release gate creaked open. 2 older coyotes slipped through, first padding cautiously into the open forest. Then came Finn. He paused at the threshold, nose raised. A breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of spruce, thawing soil and freedom. He stepped forward. With each movement, the trees seemed to embrace him. There was no confusion, no fear, just purpose. Samantha's hand covered her mouth. Ethan didn't blink. Finn trotted forward, paused once to glance over his shoulder, not at the humans, but at the place that had held him. Then he ran lithe and silent into the forest's embrace, a wild heart returning to its rhythm. Hours later, back in Aspen Valley, as dusk spilled into the sanctuary grounds, Ethan stood before the new sign now hanging at the entrance, Aspen Heart Wildlife Refuge, a place to begin again. Guests would arrive tomorrow. Reporters, neighbors, curious travelers. But tonight it was just Ethan and Samantha beneath the quiet sky, watching the shadows stretch long across the trees. A breeze stirred the wind chimes by the barn, soft and solemn like distant howls carried on memory. Chapter 8. Where the Wild Things Return. The morning of the sanctuary's grand opening arrived, dressed in celebration. A gentle spring breeze whispered through the tall pines lining the edge of Aspen Heart Wildlife Refuge, stirring the fresh banners that fluttered above the wooden gate. Birds chirped in the canopy above, as if summoned for chorus, and the air smelled of pine resin, new blossoms, and something older, like memory awakening. Inside the main lodge, Ethan Blake straightened the final welcome sign, while Samantha arranged a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the outer ridge. The structure, once a crumbling barn, now glowed with fresh cedar beams, nature-themed art, and rows of wooden benches facing a central hearth. A large photograph of Finn, taken in his last days at the clinic, hung in a simple frame above the mantel, his amber eyes sharp yet peaceful. Guests began to trickle in just after 10. Locals arrived with casseroles and cameras. Families brought children bundled in vests and boots, their cheeks pink with mountain air. Among them was Clara Millstone, a soft-spoken retired schoolteacher in her 70s, with silver hair pinned in a low bun. She wore a long knitted shawl and carried a photo album from the town's historical society. "I just wanted to see the dream come true," she told Samantha gently, tapping a faded photo of Emily smiling beside a sketched map of the sanctuary site. By noon, the open fields were alive with visitors. Children wandered the safe trails guided by markers and signs hand-painted with animal tracks. One enclosure housed a red-tailed hawk recovering from a wing injury. Another sheltered a young fox rescued from an illegal trapline. There were no cages, only space cover and dignity. Ethan stepped onto the lodge's porch as Jonah Whitaker arrived, tipping his hat against the sun. The older man wore a dark ranger's uniform, its green collar stiff and clean. He smiled as he surveyed the land. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with approval. "I had help," Ethan replied, glancing at Samantha, who was leading a group of young volunteers toward the observation blinds. They spoke with a kind of quiet that only men of action know, few words heavy meaning. By mid-afternoon, the final speaker of the day took the small wooden platform outside the lodge. Rosa Jimenez had traveled from Leadville just that morning, accompanied by her intern Noah and a file folder of updates. She wore a denim jacket over a plain white blouse, her voice rich with calm assurance. "When wild things arrive at our door," she began, "they don't come to stay, they come to remind us of who we once were. They come with wounds, with instincts, with eyes that carry both fear and fire. And if we are wise enough, we listen. We offer healing, not ownership. Shelter, not possession. And when the time is right, we let them go." She paused, unfolding a photo Finn mid-stride, vanishing into the tree line during his release. "Finn is thriving," she said. "He's been sighted twice by our monitoring team. He's formed a small group with 2 other released coyotes. He hunts, he roams, and he howls." The audience sat still, moved not by spectacle, but by truth. As dusk settled over Aspen Valley, most guests had departed. Only a handful of volunteers remained cleaning stacking, laughing softly among themselves. Samantha was on the back porch sorting gear when she noticed Ethan staring toward the tree line beyond the far enclosure. He stood motionless, expression unreadable. She walked to his side. "What is it?" He didn't speak, only lifted a hand, slow, gentle. Far at the forest's edge, a shadow moved between two spruce trunks. The shape was fleeting, silent but familiar, too large for a fox, too low for a deer. And then just before it slipped into the brush, a flash of amber eyes, watching, recognizing. It was gone in a breath. Ethan let out a quiet exhale, neither surprised nor shaken. "He came back," Samantha said, her voice catching in her throat. "No," Ethan said softly, a small smile tugging at the edge of his lips. "He never really left." Later that night, the sanctuary stood hushed beneath a velvet sky. Stars bloomed above the pines like old stories rekindled. The wind rustled gently through the grasses, carrying with it the faint, distant echo of a howl, raw, beautiful, and full of belonging. Inside the lodge, the fire crackled low. Ethan sat near the hearth with Emily's notebook in his lap. He traced the final page where she had once written, "Let them find their way back to the forest, to healing, to hope." He whispered, "We're home now, Em. You, me, and every wild thing you believed in." And outside in the dark expanse beyond the fences, something wild listened and understood. Finn didn't just find his way back to the wild. He reminded us all that even when we're lost, there's a place that's waiting to welcome us home. In life, maybe we've all met a moment like that, a quiet sign, a second chance, a feeling that we were finally where we belonged. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Comment below, have you ever helped someone find their way, even if it meant letting them go? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where love always finds its way home.